We're going to get started because I see I'm a few minutes late, so I apologize. We're getting started a little bit late, but I hope everybody had a wonderful, wonderful Pesach, and that we're now getting back in, as they say, chozrim l'shigra, getting back into our regular schedule, which will then be interrupted next week by all the things we have next week, and then the week after, and then the week after. So it's Baruch Hashem, next week Yom Ha'atzmaut, Yom HaZikaron. No, there are classes. There are classes. It's a very busy month that we have coming up. But Be'ezrat Hashem, it should be a meaningful Zman Kayetz of learning together. And as always, we daven that our learning should protect our chayalim, our soldiers, and should bring back our chatufim, bring much nechama to all those who have been affected by this war. And as we always end as well, Kadosh Baruch Hu should give guidance, the proper guidance to our leaders to make the right decisions. Be'ezrat Hashem, all b'zchut our learning. Okay, so we're kind of getting back into something we were in the middle of talking about, and the truth was, my initial plan had been to finish talking about davening with the Tzibbur before Pesach. I even tried to rush it. Those of you who were here the last class before Pesach, I tried to rush in the last few ideas, and I was like, you know what? Better to do a little bit less. Sometimes less is more. So what I decided was we're going to spend this week finishing up the topic of davening with the Tzibbur, the power, as I call it, of davening with the Tzibbur, part 3. We're going to repeat one important idea that we did cover last time we were together. But I think it's an important idea, and I kind of rushed it at the very end. And then we're going to cover a topic which has come up, we haven't really discussed in detail, and that is the topic of women's obligation, or women, whether there is a value. What value there is to women davening with the Tzibbur as well. So I want to start with, just to remember what we've been talking about. We had been discussing the few weeks leading up to Pesach, talking about the importance and the power of davening with a Tzibbur, with a minyan. We spent a lot of time seeing various ideas as to why it's important to daven with the Tzibbur, the value of what comes of davening with the Tzibbur. What we also saw towards the end was we discussed how there is a second type of davening b'tzibur. There's davening with a minyan, but then there's also something where if we look at the text of our tefillah, the text actually is in the language of plural, where we're not just, when we say, even the davening that we do that's as an individual, the Shmona Esrei and much of the tefillot that we have are stated in the plural, where we're not just davening for ourselves, we're actually davening for the community. That's a second type of tefillah b'tzibur, because the idea is that our tefillot are not simply self-directed, but the tefillot are biklali. They're for OUIsrael. There's also an opportunity for us to add in our own personal tefillot, but we have to remember that much of our tefillot is meant to be not just for ourselves in a selfish way, but to also be davening for the community and for the tzibur. The last thing we did was a beautiful idea that it's become a famous idea that was developed by Rav Soloveitchik, the Rav, regarding another type of tefillah b'tzibur, and he distinguished between two ideas. Again, we saw this last time, but I want to kind of see it inside again. He distinguishes between what he calls tefillah b'tzibur and tefillat hatzibur. Okay, what's the difference between the two? Tefillah b'tzibur, which is a tremendously valuable thing, refers to a group of individuals who come together to daven as a minyan. I am sitting there as an individual, and we have 10 individuals at least who are coming together, davening together. And says Rav Soloveitchik, many of the sources that we saw that talk about the value of davening with a minyan refer to that idea. The idea that people come together and they daven as one creates a certain aura. It creates a certain ambiance, is much more powerful. HaKadosh Baruch Hu, as we know, the Shechina is found anytime 10 people come together to daven, and that, says Rav Soloveitchik, is a very powerful idea. But there is another type of tefillah that we are able to tap into when we come together as a community, and that is what he calls tefillat hatzibur. And that is when the community is no longer a group of individuals, each of them davening together. It is when the tzibur coalesces and creates a communal tefillah. The tefillah of the community. It's not a tefillah within the community. It's a tefillah of the community. And the best way to, I think, to understand this, and Rav Soloveitchik himself distinguishes this as well, is the model of korbanot. When we had korbanot in the Beit HaMikdash, there were different types of korbanot. There were the korbanot yachid, And then there were the korbanot Tzibbur. Korbanot Yachid referred to an individual had to bring a korban, whatever korban that would be. And every individual would come and bring the korban. It could be if he sinned a korban chatat, or it could be if he took a vow when he promised to bring a korban. So he would bring a korban nidava, or a korban neder, a korban olah. Another way of looking at it, we just celebrated Pesach, was Korban Pesach. What was Korban Pesach? Everybody had to bring a Korban Pesach. So if the Mishnah describes in Masechet Pesachim how you had hundreds of thousands of people who were coming and bringing a Korban Pesach all on one day. If you think we have bad traffic in Yerushalayim now on Chol HaMoed, imagine what it was like walking to or trying to bring your horse, whatever it was, to bring your goat to Yerushalayim on Erev Pesach when all of OUisrael were coming on Erev Pesach on Yud Daled Nisan to bring the Korban Pesach. To me, that is the symbolic or is comparable to Tfilah B'Tzibbur. Each individual was bringing their own Korban Pesach, but they were doing it in a communal way. The Mishnah Pesachim describes how the Kohanim were very efficient in doing the shechita and passing the blood. It had to be very, very efficient because there was a lot of people bringing a lot of korbanot all together. Then there was another type of korban, which is what we call a korban hatzibur, which is one animal that's brought, but that one animal represents the entire community. Okay, the korbanot of the Chagim are korbanot tzibur. The korbanot of Yom Kippur, korban tamid. Thank you, correct. Korban tamid is also a korban tzibur, where it is one animal that is brought, but that animal represents the entire community. Says Rav Soloveitchik, it is the same thing with tefillah. When we daven with a minyan, we are actually tapping into two different levels of communal tefillah. There is tefillah b'tzibur, where we're all coming together. And that he describes as what happens when we all say the silent Shemona Esrei together. When everyone, the whole minyan comes together and they're each saying their own silent Shemona Esrei, that is tefillah b'tzibur. We're each individually saying our own tefillah, but we're doing it as a community. And there's tremendous value spiritually and many different things that we can gain from that. Then, says Soloveitchik, we have Chazarat HaShatz. Chazarat HaShatz is when the Shliach Tzibbur gets up, one person says the tefillah, the rest of us say Amen, and that, says Rav Soloveitchik, is comparable to Tfilat HaTzibur. That is one prayer said by one person, but he is representing the entire community. And that, says Rav Soloveitchik, is comparable, is meant to be modeled after the Korban Tzibur. So if you look at source number one, this is an excerpt from an essay. So again, I believe that what Rav Soloveitchik speaks about it specifically regard Korban Hatzibur specifically regarding Chazarat HaShatz. I believe we can suggest that it really refers to any time the community comes together, all those things that we can only say as a tzibur, Kaddish, Kedusha. Again, I don't know, he doesn't extend it to those things. But to me, it is logical to suggest that anything which can only be said as a tzibur would be Tfilat HaTzibur. When we say Slichot, Hashem Kel Rachum V'Chanun, all together, that, again, I don't know. It could be that Rav Soloveitchik would see that as we're all saying it, and it's just something that we as individuals can all say only together. Or it could be that when we all say it together, it coalesces to be Tfilat HaTzibur. The uniqueness about Chazarat HaShatz, which could be what Rav Soloveitchik was referring to, is that it's only the Chazan says it, and if only the Chazan saying it, he's representing everybody. You could, in theory, try to extend that idea to any time the community comes together to say things that only we can say as a tzibur. I don't know. That's an interesting question. Okay, if you look at source number one, this is where Rav Soloveitchik describes the idea, a beautiful idea. He's discussing a halachic question regarding what should be said out loud on Chazarat HaShatz, and through that he develops this idea, and he develops it in many different places. I just brought you one excerpt. Uvipshuto nira, says Rav Soloveitchik, it seems to be Shehashatz, the Shliach Tzibur, tzarich lomar kol nusach shel Elokeinu ve'Elokei Avoseinu b'kol ram. Right, any part of the Shemona Esrei, and I think he's referring here to if I'm not mistaken, he's referring to the Birkat Kohanim, which if there is no Kohen, then you say then that certainly in Chutz La'aretz where they don't do Birkat Kohanim, so they say Elokeinu ve'Elokei Avoseinu b'Rachinu b'Bracha. There's a part that only the Chazan says, and says the Shliach Tzibur, it needs to all be said out loud. Okay, well, we're going to skip the bracketed part. Dirak Masha Omer b'Kol Ram v'yesh Shama Tish'a Hashomim u'Makshivim Hu denechshav kichelek mitfilat hashliach tzibur. Says Rav Soloveitchik, because only when the shliach tzibur says something out loud and you have at least 9, i.e., therefore, a group of 10 who are coming together to say it, you have the Shliach Tzibbur saying the Tefillah, and everyone else is listening and answering and responding, then it becomes a part of the Tfilat HaTzibur of the Shliach Tzibbur. Debeis inyanim nifradim heim b'halacha. Because there are 2 different concepts when it comes to the Tfilah of the community. Tfilah b'tzibur u'tfilat HaTzibur. V'tfilah b'tzibur, what is Tfilah b'tzibur? Hainu ma sheyesh 10 b'nei adam hamitpalalim tfilah b'lachash b'yachad b'makom echad. What is Tfilah b'tzibur? Tfilah as a community. That's when you have 10 people, each of them saying their individual tefillot quietly. He refers to Tfilah b'lachash, and they're all saying it together. And there's a special power to that. Utfilat hatzibur hainu chazarat hashatz shehachazan mishamesh kishlucham shel hatzibur. And then Tfilat hatzibur is chazarat hashatz because the shliach tzibur is the shaliach. He is the messenger. He is the representative of the community. Lehitpalel echad be'ad kulam. He is davening as in himself for everybody. Vidugmat kohen hamakriv korban tzibur b'veit hamikdash. It is similar to a kohen who brings the korban tzibur. When the kohen would bring the korban tzibur, as he says, hu korban echad, it was one animal, ha'oleh be'ad kol hatzibur, that was meant to represent the entire community. And therefore, says Soloveitchik, that is what chazarat hashatz is. We're going to skip source number 2 for now, but if you look at source number 3, in Nefesh Harav, one second, I just want to finish this point, and I'm happy to take a question or a comment. In Nefesh Harav, which is a sefer that Rav Hershel Schachter, Rosh Yeshiva, and Rosh Kol Yeshiva University, who was one of the Talmidei Muvak of Rav Soloveitchik. So he has a book called Nefesh Harav, where it's actually a series, where he outlines different minhagim that Rav Soloveitchik had. So if you look at source number 3, Rav Schachter brings this idea, and he even mentions a practical ramification of this halacha. Rabbeinu haya ragil omar, in source number 3. Rabbeinu means Rav Soloveitchik used to say, Shebet inyanim nifradim hema. There are 2 different concepts. Tfilah b'tzibur, v'tfilat hatzibur. As we said, Chazarat hashatz hi tfilat hatzibur. And Chazarat hashatz is the tfilah of the community. Utfilat hashatz einena rach tfilat atzmo. Right? When the Chazan says Tfilah, the Shliach Tzibur, he's not just davening for himself. Ela Tfilah Kol HaTzibur. And therefore, he said it's a Tfilah for the entire Tzibur. V'asher lefikach ba'amirat hashatz birkat ritzei, when the Shliach Tzibur gets up to the words of Modim of ritzei, hofechat Tfilat HaShliach Tzibur liot chashuva ki korban Tzibur. The tefillah then becomes like a communal offering. The same model. It's the same idea. It is on behalf of the entire community. Ayin Sham, and he says it also has, it impacts Birkat Kohanim. And then he says the following: Ulefikach, and we mentioned this last time as well. Therefore, Nahag Rabbeinu, therefore Rav Soloveitchik had the minhag la'amod biraglayim mechuvanot kol hazman dechazarat hatshatz ki adam ha'omed bitfilah. Rav Soloveitchik had the minhag that even during Chazarat Hashatz, which is the time when many of us start to walk around and, hopefully not look at our phones and look at the sefer that's right in front of us and look what other alone is over there and talk to our friend, right? All the things we shouldn't be doing. Rav Soloveitchik had the minhag, and I've seen many people who do this. His minhag was the entire Chazarat Hashatz, he stood with his feet together, focused, following word for word. Why? Because he understood that this tefillah was not just the chazan saying Shmona Esrei again. It was the tefillah for the entire tzibur that was there. The chazan was representing him. And in order to be represented, he needed to be appropriately ready for tefillah. And therefore, Rav Soloveitchik had the minhag to stand there with his feet closed. Okay, a couple of questions. Well, I'll get to you 1 second. So he had raised his hand first. Yes.
One question about tefillah.
Sure.
People are saying it together, or is it okay if one person is saying Baruch Shema and one person is saying Shema?
Good question. The question that was asked was, if we're talking about Tfilah B'tzibur, does it have to be that everyone's kind of up to the same thing at the same time? Or can it be that everyone, one guy's in Baruch Shema and the other guy's close to Yishabach and the other guy's still putting on his tefillin? Good question. I don't know. I haven't seen Rav Soloveitchik discuss in detail. I think, obviously, the idea is, and part of why, again, also, by the way, if you think about it, there's also different models. This just came to me now. if you think about the way that Ashkenazim daven or the way that Sephardim daven, right? The Sephardi davening, even the Sephardi Psukei de Zimra, is is similar to what we have for Chazrat Hashatz, where the person gets up and he's saying, and everyone says it together, right? What do we do in Ashkenazim? If we're lucky, the Chazan says the first line and the last line, and then everyone tries to catch up to him for each paragraph. Okay. Now, what's the purpose of that? Some places, by the way, there are some yeshivot and some places where they say, nope, everyone on your own. In 15 minutes, we're going to get up, or 20 minutes, we're going to get up to Yishtabach. We don't need to have a pace. Many shuls try to have a pace. I think the purpose of having that pace, of ending every paragraph, is to try to keep a certain pace together. And I think that's the ideal of what we would call tefillah b'tzibur. We're each saying it, but we're each saying the same thing. Now, does that mean if I fall behind or I come a little bit late, I've missed out? I don't know. I don't know where to draw that line. You could argue that as long as we're all in the act of davening together and we're all generally in the same place, that's considered to be. For example, Tfilat HaTzibur of Shmona Esrei, there's halachic questions of what's considered to be davening with the tzibur. You have to start with the. There is a halachic discussion about these things. It's usually mostly around Shmona Esrei, which is the main tefillah, than it is around the other stuff. But I don't want to get into the nitty gritty. But it's a good question. I think you're right that in order for it to qualify as what we're calling tefillah b'tzibur, you should be generally up to the community. Now, if you're not, what do? Should you skip? Should you? Those are all halachic questions. What happens if you come late to shul, and how do you? That's that. But it's a good question. It's a good question. Yes.
If the understanding that she does, it did during the entire Chazar Shashatz. Does that mean that he's cholik with obviously a significant majority that said that told his motive to Rabbanan that he said Chazar Shashatz?
No, so I don't know. I do believe that he holds that we do say modim de Rabbanan. Again, if there are I would say it this way. I'm not 100% sure because I didn't do the research on how it applies to modim de Rabbanan. But what I do know that by modim de Rabbanan, there's also a big debate what you're supposed to do. Meaning, there are some people that when we're saying modim de Rabbanan, then very often in some places the chazan just says the regular modim to himself and no one can hear him, and then by the time you get back, hopefully you end by the time he ends. Other places say no, you're supposed to wait, let everyone say modim de Rabbanan, and then wait so that everyone can hear you. You're supposed to say every single word out loud, ideally in a way that everyone can hear it. I think we generally assume that. I mean that even when I'm saying modim de Rabbanan, I should still be able to hear the chazan saying the regular modim. I don't think that this is necessarily one against the other. It's a good question because if it's tefillah hatzibur, so it could be that he holds that even at tefillah hatzibur, sometimes just like we all say amen and baruch hu v'ruch shemo, it could be that there is some kind of give and take.
Then the question is, do you say amen when you're saying
well, there is no amen because the amen is only the later part, but we are saying our own text. You mean after hatov shimcha? Right, but there's no. We all say amen. Then we say modim. He says modim, and then for the next bracha. By the time he gets to the next bracha, I think we all agree that we answer. But it's a good question. Yes.
What are the sources actually for Chazar Shashatz? Because surely the fact that everybody's talking, Rabbi Soloveitchik is the only one who's standing.
So again, it's not. So I don't think that necessarily means that. The general, my understanding is the source and the main source for the concept of tefillah b'tzibur of Chazrat Hashatz was the idea that it used to be at a time when not everyone knew the text, and therefore, and that's why it started. Okay, I don't think that necessarily goes against what Rav Soloveitchik is saying, because it could be that the reason it was initially instituted, we could ask the question once. Meaning the main question, and by the way, there are many people who have tried to say we shouldn't do Chazrat Hashatz anymore. Why? Because we all have Siddurim, we all know how to say it. And I think Rav Soloveitchik's idea is proof that no, there still is value to what we're doing. Meaning, I don't think it's necessarily in either or proposition. It could be that it started out as something that was practical, but it still has meaning, it has significance, and it could be its later significance that it becomes something that now we come together as a community to offer. And I think again, even if you understood it to be that it was initially instituted for people who didn't know, the fact that we do it as a community doesn't mean that we can treat it. The fact that we still do it means we should be treating it with respect. So I think Rav Soloveitchik's point of, if you're not going to stand with your feet together, the idea that you should be paying attention and answering amen and not talking and not, all those things, I think that's 100% true, even if you didn't necessarily agree with Rav Soloveitchik's distinction. But I do believe that Rav Soloveitchik's distinction has a tremendous amount of meaning in terms of visually understanding the power of Chazrat Hashatz. Okay, yes. 2 last questions and then we'll go on.
The reason that we say modim alone is because you can't have Hashem for you. So therefore, is it really necessary to even listen to the Chazin's part of the Modim? We're saying Modim, and he's saying Modim for himself.
It's a good question. I'm not sure. I'll have to look into that. I don't know. I don't know exactly why we say the Modim D'Rabbanan. What you're saying makes sense. Although, why would we have a different text than what he has? It's an interesting. Yeah, we did. Correct. But again, if we understand that, and this is what I think, if we understand that this is really a communal tefillah, then it would make sense. We each should hear his text as well. I don't think it's mutually exclusive. We could say our own text and still think that there's a value to what we're saying. Yeah, of course, 100%. But that doesn't necessarily take away from the importance of hearing his text as well. That's a good point.
I just have a question about davening generally because I have yahrzeit twice a year for my parents, and then I go with my son to shul because he unfortunately also has to say Kaddish. It's unbelievable how fast the men daven shachars in the morning. Like it takes them about 25.
So we get a lot of so that's a comment. Many of you have commented about the speed of this, and by the way, we're going to get to that. By the way, that's actually something we're going to touch upon today when we talk about the obligation for women. Whether women should go to shul, should they go to shul every day? Do they need to go to shul every day? Should they daven with a minyan? Should they daven at home? This is an interesting question that you're raising. I think it's and again. You've mentioned this a number of times. Many people have mentioned this. I think at the end of the day, and the one thing that I would say about that is that every shul has its own pace, has its own nature, has its own style. And I think you're right that, and I think there's also, I don't think there's one rule that every minyan needs to be slower, every minyan needs to be faster, because there are different types of people, and there are some people, as I mentioned in the past, there are some people I've heard that say that they have better kavanah when davening is shorter, because as opposed to when davening is longer. And I see the logic to that in the sense that obviously you have to say the words, but people say words at different paces, and some people. So I think that, as we all know, people are different, and people find meaning in different styles and in different lengths and in different things. Obviously, there's always going to be a limit in terms of what should be the minimum amount of time. And we could sit here and debate what that should be. I think the job of a shul and the job of a rabbi is to find that balance between what is appropriate, what should be the minimum, what should be like, listen, this is already becoming what we would call a chucha v'tlula, which means it's almost embarrassing. It's not davening. That should be a limit. That's the job of the rabbi and the leadership of a community to say, this is the minimum, whatever that is. I mean, I've been in many shuls where they have a set time. Some shuls depends on the chazan. Whatever chazan gets up there, sometimes it's long. Some shuls, they say no. 10 minutes for this, 15 minutes for this, 7 minutes for... And there actually is a sheet of paper that says, please do not start. And that, at least you know what you're getting. At least you know what shul you're going to. I think our job is to find a community in a shul that is matim for us. If we know that we're somebody who davens slowly, which I think is always valuable, and that's what works for us, then we should be trying to find a community and a minyan that reflects that. But I think that the way that I say it is that, like, I find with minyanim, everybody has their pace, and anyone who goes faster than them is way too fast, and anyone who goes slower than them is way too slow. Right? That's just it. Meaning, so like, and if we went around the room now, we probably would get 50 different approaches as to how long it should be. So my point is that it's very individualized, and our job is to try to find the community that most reflects our values. The job of a rabbi in a community and the leadership of a community is to find that balance between the needs of those communities and what that community wants, because every community person is very different. Yes, there was one more question, I think. Yeah.
No, just a comment that I heard that many of the communities really daven very fast. It's to outrace the Yetzer Hara.
Very cute. To outrace the Yetzer Hara. No, I have heard some people say that was suggested by the Yetzer Hara. Yes, okay. Very nice. I think it is important to recognize that there are some people who a faster pace is more meaningful for them in terms of a flow of the tefillah, or there's somebody who, when they take longer, their mind starts to wander. Many of us who I'm sure have davened longer also often find ourselves being like, what bracha am I in Shemona Esrei, right? You're sitting there and you're going to daven slowly, you're going to say every word, and I'm sure I'm talking to mostly myself, but many of us here as well. And all of a sudden you're davening and you're going slow. All of a sudden you're like, thinking about the New York Mets and thinking about the stock market, and then you're like, wait, what bracha am I up to? Did I already do Slach Lanu Avinu, or did I not do Slach Lanu? It's embarrassing to do it a second time, right? So you have to. So the point is that longer isn't always better. I think we should strive to be saying every word, trying to say every word with kavanah. For everybody, that might be a little bit different, and I think it's important to recognize that And it's the job of a community leader to find that right balance that helps everybody. And for us to be mashlim. What I mean by that is, if we come to a minyan, this is the minyan we daven at, and they go too fast, you know what we really should be doing? Not just, I'm saying it's okay to complain, it's okay to speak to the rabbi. But you know what you should do? Come 5 minutes earlier. Come 5 minutes. If you know that this is a minyan that goes too fast, but this is the minyan you're going to daven in, put it upon yourself. I think we should be focusing on the onus on ourselves and say, I know this is something that goes too fast for me, but this is where I want to daven. I'm going to make an effort to come earlier, to start Psukkah Zimra earlier. I'm not saying we can't complain to the powers that be if that is the appropriate thing to do. But I think it's more effective to put the challenge on us to try to find that pace and to try to find that than it is to do everything else. Okay, I if it's... Tefillah b'tzibur? I think so. I think that qualifies. Again, we're talking about starting Psukkah Zimra. I'm not saying so you start Shmona Esrei. I think if you're doing that in order to be able to keep pace to get to, I think so. I believe so. I'm not saying to start Shmona Esrei before them. I'm saying to start Psukkah Zimra before them. So those are parts so that when they get up to Yishtabach and Shema, you're hopefully at pace with them, which is the most important place to be at pace with them. That would be my understanding. Okay, what I'd like to do now is this community.
It was still Ashkenazi, but I daven with the Sfard, and then the other one you look at here, you'll see how it's basic, but it's different. So if I go up there, no one can tell me that I can only daven that other.
Okay, so you're raising a different thing. I think what you were talking about, and again, I don't want to spend too much time on it, but this is an interesting phenomenon, and I think it's important. I'll mention it very, very briefly, and that is nusach. Okay, so you have it. What again? This is obviously there's more than this. The general 3 nuschaot that exist in Israel. Again, there's more because within Sephardi there's probably like 30 different types of Sephardi. But there's what we call Ashkenazi. There's what we call nusach Sfarad. Okay, which is Ashkenazi with a twist. They say v'yatzmach purkaneh, and they change a few words here. It's mostly Ashkenazi. In America, we call that we call that Sfard. No, that's Nusach Sfard. And then you have what's called Idut Mizrach, which in America we usually call the Sfardim, but that's a little bit it's different here. Okay, so you have Ashkenazi, Nusach Sfard, Idut Mizrach. Now Idut Mizrach is a totally different text. Generally, they have a different style. They have a different way of how they do it. Nusach Ashkenaz and Nusach Sfard are similar, but they have their additions. They have their orders are different. I don't want to get into all the details of that. Now, should a shul have one or not? When I recall, for many, many, many years when I was growing up, certainly in my shul in America, and many, many shuls in America, and I imagine it was true here, most shuls had their nusach. It was nusach Ashkenaz, and it was nusach Sfard, and that was what it is. It has become much, much more common. When I lived in Ra'anana about 15 years ago, and there was one shul that had this, and I thought it was very, very strange. It depended on the chazan. If the chazan who got up was Ashkenaz, and everyone did Ashkenaz, and if the chazan that got up that did Sfarad, was Sfarad. I remember thinking this is very strange. Now, 15 years later, having moved, I live in Shalavim, and many shuls have adopted that minhag. I don't know why. The shul that I'm in now, that I daven in Kibbutz Shalavim, used to be a very proud Ashkenaz. That was who we are. And now, whenever they get up, whoever gets up, I find that very frustrating because I don't know what the guy is saying, especially when we're talking about answering Kedusha. Right? Am I supposed to say Nekadesh? Am I supposed to say Naktishach v'Naritzach? So there was the shul in Ra'anana that used to do it. I thought it was something that was very smart. They used to have a sign, and the sign had one side it said Sfard, and the other side it said Ashkenaz. And when the chazan got up, the gabbai or the chazan's job was to turn the sign. So at least the Tzibbur knew what we're saying. Now, whether or not this is the right thing to do, it seems to have become much more mikubal. Maybe it's just a form of trying to give expression to everyone who moves into the community, recognizing that we're all different groups. I don't know why it's become much more common. I find it confusing, but it has become much more commonplace. What's more confusing is when you have a shul that doesn't have a sign. Because my shul doesn't have a sign. And I once went to them and I said, well, why don't we have a sign? They're like, well, most people know who the guy is getting up. I'm like, what if it's a guest? What if I just moved here and I haven't learned? So to me, if a shul decides to do that, they should at least have a sign so they can inform the tzibur what nusach you're davening. Yes, but even that I get confused about sometimes because I don't always know which order they did it in. Meaning you're right, but let's say I don't hear whether they started with Hodu or this or that. And also, and this is where it gets even more confusing, you have one chazan from Psukkah Zimra, and another chazan gets up there for Yishtabach. So it can sometimes get confusing. That's true, but even there, sometimes you might forget, you don't remember. Meaning I find it confusing personally. But that's become the communal approach. Yes. Okay. I really don't want to take too much time on this, but one thing, and then I want to go on. Pronunciation of the. Again. So that. It's a great question. I think that again, Elu ve'elu divrei Elokim chayim. I think everyone has their own pronunciation and their own way of saying the tefillot. It could be certain tziburs will only let someone be a chazan if they have that. That's a communal decision. The one time that really becomes a question is in Kriyat HaTorah, and the only time that really becomes a question is when Kriyat HaTorah is biblical, which would be on Parshat Zachor. So I'll just tell you a quick story. My wife, my oldest was born a week before Purim. If she had been a boy, it would have been a bris on Purim Mishulash. Okay, she was a girl. Baruch Hashem, wonderful. Take that as you will. And my wife, and we were in Shari Tzedek, and my wife went in. We were in over Shabbos. The baby hadn't been born yet, but we were at the hospital already Friday night. Baby was born Motzei Shabbat, and I davened in the shul in Shari Tzedek. Long story. We talked about it another time. But and I davened in the shul in Shari Tzedek, and it wasn't Shari Tzedek. I'm sorry, it was Hadassah in Karem, and I davened for Parsha Zachor. I davened in the shul. They had at least 7 different readings of Parshat Zachor. They had Ashkenazi, Sephardi, Hasidish, Yerushalmi Hasidish, Teimani. So now, there you're talking about a biblical commandment to read from the Torah. I can understand that people are going to be makbid. You want it to be read in your... And therefore, there are many shuls where even if they're Ashkenazi, they'll still have someone come up and read it from Edut Mizrach, or read it just because we're talking about the biblical fulfillment of a mitzvah. And therefore, you can makbid. When it comes to regular davening, again, certain communities might say, no, this is our community and you have to daven the way that we do it. But in terms of what's considered appropriate, I think any nusach that is within the general approach, I think is considered to be appropriate. Okay, so now we're gonna move on to the topic of women and tefillah b'tzibur. Again, this topic I know is mostly relevant for the women, but I think it's actually an important topic because it enables us to highlight a couple of different aspects of tefillah b'tzibur that I think are important. Just quick background and a summary of what we've seen till now regarding the obligation of tefillah b'tzibur. When we discussed the men's obligation for tefillah b'tzibur, you may recall that even there was a machloket whether men are obligated to daven b'tzibur or whether it's just recommended because it's an opportunity. The language of the Shulchan Aruch we saw was yishtadel. You should try. Didn't say you're chayav to. And some were medayik, some inferred from the Shulchan Aruch that this is something that's an opportunity. We saw the power, the Gemaras all talk about what you gain from it and how the tefillos are more accepted and the Shechina is found. And some poskim understood that to mean it's something you should try to do because your tefillot will become more accepted and have more power to them. But it is not a full-fledged obligation. We saw that Rav Moshe Feinstein in a couple of places and many other poskim say, no, this is an actual obligation. This is an actual obligation, all things being considered. It could be that if you have various reasons not to, for certain circumstances, then okay, you can be lenient. It's not, you still should daven, but it's not as important, it's not as high of a level as the obligation to daven. But Rav Moshe did say that it was what he called a chovah, an obligation and a mitzvah that a person should try to daven with a minyan. But understanding that even when it comes to men, there's a question is an important background as we now look at the question for women. Okay, the poskim say pretty much unequivocally that women are not obligated to daven for tzibur. Okay, they're definitely not obligated to daven with a minyan. There are 2 main reasons that are brought down that are mentioned for why that is the case. One is, which is the more famous, well-known reason, right? Because this is a mitzvah aseh shazman grama. That even though we saw that according to many poskim, tefillah itself, the concept of just davening, that's not a tefillah mitzvah aseh shazman grama because you can daven whenever you want. Right? We saw the Rambam says that davening, just davening, can be done in any form whenever you want, and therefore it is not a time-bound mitzvah. But davening b'tzibur is certainly going to be a time-bound mitzvah because there's only certain times when you can find the tzibur, and therefore it would follow that since women are exempt from mitzvah aseh shazman grama, they are not obligated. That's one reason. They're also not counted in the tzibur. The other reason that poskim mentioned for why women are not obligated to daven b'tzibur is because they are not counted in the minyan. That because they're not counted. Now, this is actually interesting because some poskim say the opposite. Some poskim say the reason why they're not counted b'tzibur is because they're not obligated b'tzibur. So, which came first, the chicken or the egg? It's a good question. But many poskim do just say that since women are not not counted for the minyan, they are therefore not obligated. Okay. Now, why are women? What we're going to get there. We're going to get there. Now the question becomes, well, okay. So when it comes to women being patur from mitzvah l'shesh hazman grama, what's the main reason why women are generally patur from mitzvah l'shesh hazman grama? So the standard understanding and explanation is, again, I'm summarizing lots of different discussions and sources just to kind of simplify it for us. Is that because women have other obligations and have other opportunities and things that they are dealing with, specifically when it comes to child rearing. And that requires not just time, but it requires mental energy. It requires a lot of thought. And therefore, when you're in that stage of life, it's not like you can say, well, okay, so it takes 2 hours to get the kids out, and therefore I could, no. Once you're in that stage of life, that any mother can attest, and I'm sure many of us who are fathers can attest to this as well, seeing, not from what we do, but from seeing what mothers do, is that it is a full-time job. Even if you have another full-time job, it is a full-time job. It requires your time, your energy, your emotions. And therefore, women are not obligated in that mitzvah in anything that is timed out, including the mitzvah of davening or the opportunity of davening with the minyan. The question becomes, that's great for women who are in that stage of life, and every woman can decide how long that stage of life goes for her in terms of how long those obligations go. But what about for women who are forever? Amen. But what about those who feel that they're past that stage? Or what about people who are before that stage? What about young women who are teenagers, who have not yet begun that stage? Maybe they should be obligated. Meaning, if it's all just a practical element of needing to raise a family, so then why maybe they should not? Should they take advantage of the opportunity? So what's clear is, and again, this is all clear, and then we're going to see a bit of a machlokas in certain aspects. What is certainly clear is that even women who are not at that stage are still patur. They're still exempt. Meaning, it is no question of fundamentally, even a young woman who is bat mitzvah and is not yet going to be involved in motherhood for a long time. Still, fundamentally, the mitzvah is, women are patur from mitzvah l'shesh hazman grama, so fundamentally they are patur, just like they're not obligated in sukkah, or they're not obligated in lulav, they're not obligated in many other mitzvot that are mitzvah l'shesh hazman grama, even if they have not yet entered the stage of motherhood. Now, why is that? Some might suggest, and this is what the machshava side to this understanding, some will suggest that, and this obviously highlights the difference between men and women, and that, again, from a spiritual perspective, it's not just that they can't do these things because they're busy. It could also be that the nature of women is such that they are able to connect without, I'm using a phrase that is not necessarily true of everybody, without needing necessarily these different mitzvot. Women have a more innate nature and an ability to connect, and that might apply to tefillah. The argument has been made that when it comes to the world of tefillah, women might have an ability to be able to, men might require that group mindset. Men might need more of the energy that comes with the Tzibbur. Whereas for women, it's not necessarily needed. They might be able to connect in a more personal way, in a more private way, even without the minyan or the shul. That doesn't mean they can't. And it doesn't mean that if a woman feels that she would like to and it helps her tefillah, that she's discouraged from coming. But it sets the tone for our understanding that this patur is a patur that exists fundamentally, and fundamentally also exists at all stages of life. And it could be based on something less, not just practical, but more hashkafic in nature in terms of the spiritual difference between men and women. Okay, yes. Excellent question. So what happens if the husband is the primary caregiver of the family, and there is a model where the husband is the one who stays home. So I think there's no question, I could be wrong, but I think there's no question that that's a more modern phenomenon. Meaning, I think, and I could be wrong, but my understanding of it is, even if that is something that is done in a number of different families, I think what was generally understood in Jewish history was that was less common. Doesn't mean it's wrong. I don't want to say it's. Oh, that's what you were talking. You're referring to that situation. I thought you were talking about something like the more modern model of what. Okay, fine. Okay, so we're in agreement. We're in agreement that the more modern model is something which is a little bit different. And I think that's a separate question. You're talking about what happens if the mother is not in the picture for whatever reason, a divorce or someone passed away. That's an excellent question. I don't know. I hadn't thought about it. My hunch would be that for practical reasons, if a husband is unable to go to minyan, and I think I've seen this, meaning I've seen this more that I would say it this way. I've never been involved in specific cases, but I have seen that in my community, for example, fathers who are in charge, they're less present in the minyanim and things like that. And I'm sure that's based on the fact that when you have practical reasons, again, remembering that even for men, it's machlokas whether it's a chiv. If you have practical reasons that you need to be involved, I don't think that reality would give them a blanket patur of mitzvah l'sheisha zman grandmother patur similar to women. Because I think the basis for that patur has also to do with the nature of men and women and not just the practical. That being said, a person also always has to weigh practical needs versus the need for a minyan. So what I'm saying is that let's say somebody's in that situation, which is a great question. I don't think that means that he doesn't do sukkah and he doesn't do. I don't think it means that he's now like a woman and therefore he's no longer obligated. I think what it means, I think it means that when it comes to certain practical things, it could be that his family responsibilities will mean that he doesn't have to go to minyan. I think it's an individual basis. It depends on the situation, depends on the needs, and he should consult with his rabbi. But I think that I would assume that most situations where a husband or a father is responsible for the family, especially when it comes to practical needs of getting the family out in the morning and taking care and all that kind of stuff, it probably means that he's patur from minyan. Does that mean he doesn't need to go on Shabbos? Does that mean he doesn't need to go at all? Those are individual questions. But I would think that the practical piece does come into play. That would be my guess.
Would it be that, say, he has to impose on neighbors?
So that's again, I don't think so. I think it would mean. I think it depends on the individual situation, and part of it might have to do with how does he feel about it. Meaning, does it bother him that he can never go to minyan? Does he feel lacking in his avodat Hashem? In which case, maybe he should on Shabbos. I don't know, impose on. I think every individual will matter. I think when it comes to the obligation to daven with a minyan, his obligation. I'm just my own understanding. I haven't really looked into this, but my understanding would be that he probably is not obligated if he has to deal with things that have to take care of the family. Whether or not there are times where he should rely on other family members or neighbors or this or that, that might have to do with, well, what are the needs? How much does he miss it? How much is it impacting him? And how much would it impact his family? There's so many factors that I think it would require an individual conversation. But I think the conversation would be different than just with women, which is, oh, you're patur, I think you're right that practically he might not need to come to minyan most of the time, but it would be a different kind of a conversation because of the difference between men and women, and there's just the overall avodat Hashem. Okay, one comment, yeah.
I've always wondered about this new idea. I've never seen it before. I personally never did it. The women saying Kaddish for their parents, especially when there's no boy in the family. I saw two women who were finished raising their children. They had husbands, but they went to shul, Shachar, Mincha, Amara, and said Kaddish.
So it's a good question. The question was asked about women saying Kaddish. I didn't look up the halachic issues of it. What I've seen it and I've heard it. My understanding is that it's acceptable if that's meaningful for the woman to do. There are some communities, and this is more, I think, of a cultural, sociological question. There are some communities where they're more comfortable that if a woman is saying Kaddish, to have a man saying it as well, just for purposes of what you want to call it tzniut, or you want however you want to say it. Meaning there are some communities that will say that first of all, if you go to most shuls, there's lots of people saying Kaddish. So the woman saying Kaddish and having 10 men saying Kaddish, that's fine if that's meaningful for her. That's what she connects to. What happens if only a woman needs to say Kaddish and there's no men who need to say Kaddish? So there are some communities where that's fine and that's accepted. I mean, halachically, she's not singing, so I don't know. The only issue could be what we would call issues of tzniut, and that's more of a sociological, cultural thing. There are some shuls where that wouldn't necessarily be socially accepted. And again, maybe we don't daven in those shuls. That's up to you, meaning. But in those shuls, I've been in a shul where I was in one time. I was in the shul, and we asked the Rav, what should happen if a woman got to say Kaddish? And he said that somebody else whose parents are not alive and has said Kaddish in the past, he should say Kaddish as well. And that way, there's a man saying Kaddish with her for purposes of what we're calling societal tzniut or social tzniut.
And they're saying it. Do you also have to have a male say it for
Oh, I don't know. I'm not sure. I don't think so. I don't think that you have to have a man saying the Kaddish. I think there's also, by the way, I mean, again, I don't get into this, but the whole idea of saying Kaddish, it used to be, and the main halacha is not that every single person needs to say Kaddish. The main halacha is that one person says Kaddish for everybody. Meaning, the straight up halacha in the Shulchan Aruch is that if, let's say you have a minyan of 15 avelim, only one says Kaddish. Because what happens, many of us are familiar with what happens when you have 10 different people saying Kaddish. This person's up to this, and this person's up to that. Do I say, I just said Yehi Shmei Rabbah, now do I say this? Well, it can get confusing. So some shuls have a designated place that everyone comes together. But there are poskim, and this was the initial, again, our minhag has become that everyone says Kaddish, and I think that's because it creates meaning more than anything else. But the main halacha was one of the Avelim says Kaddish, and he represents all of the Avelim. And I've even seen this. I've even seen this. Rav Hershel Schachter was machmir about this. And when he was in Avelis, if he was in a shul where there were other Avelim saying Kaddish, he wouldn't say Kaddish, because that is the main halacha. We generally allow others to, because it's part of their processing of the loss. But that's more of an additional thing. Okay, so we've kind of laid the groundwork. Now the question becomes, now what do we do? So is there a value to women coming and saying Kaddish? Is there a value to women saying, not coming and saying Kaddish? Is there a value to women davening with a minyan? Got confused. So let's see a couple of the sources. So there are a few different, more primary sources that I wanted to explore with you that I think are important to see. The first is a Gemara Meseches Sota. It's actually an Agadata story, but it does seem to highlight a value to women davening with a minyan. Da'ahi almana. There was an almana. There was a widow, and maybe she was coming to say Kaddish. I don't know. Doesn't say. Da'ave be kinishta b'shivivusa. She would come to shul in a specific community that wasn't a little farther from her home. It wasn't the closest shul. Right? Many of us like to go to the closest shul. That's where I go. She was going to the shul that was a little farther. Kol yoma have asya umatzla be midrashay Rabbi Yochanan. Every day she would go and she would daven in the Beit Medrash of Rabbi Yochanan, which was a little farther from her house. Amarla, he said to her, BT, like my daughter, means ma'am. Lo Beit Knesset b'shivavutech. Don't you have a shul that's closer to you? And she responded, Amarle Rebbe, v'lo schar psiot yeshli. I get more schar halicha. If I go farther to shul, then I get credit for traveling farther to shul. I'd rather get that extra credit. Okay? What do we see from this? That whatever schar is included in davening with the minyan should seem to apply to women as well. That here she was suggesting that she gets more schar for davening with the minyan. Okay? The next case. This is a Medrash, Yalkut Shimoni, source number 6. Maaseh bi'isha achat. There was one woman, she'iskina harbe. She got very, very old. Uvas lifnei Rabbi Yossi ben Chalafta. She came in front of Rabbi Yossi ben Chalafta. Amrale, she said to him, Rebbe, his kanti yoter midai. I'm too old. I'm done. I'm too old. I can't. I have no will to live. Umeachshav chaim shel navalhim. My life is just a bad life. She'eni to'emet lo ma'achal v'lo mashke. I can't eat. I can't taste anything. I can't drink anything. Va'ani mevakeshet lehipater min ha'olam. And I want to die. Okay, very sad story. This is where she got to. Amarle, ma mitzvah at limuda la'asot b'kol yom. What mitzvah do you do every day that maybe is the mitzvah that's keeping you alive? Amraleo, limode ani afilu yeshli davar chaviv, ani manachat oto umashakemet lebeit knesset kol yom. Even if I have something important to do, I make sure that all my davening is done in shul every single day. Now here we're assuming, when we say shul, we mean shul as a place of Tzibbur, not necessarily as a place of just Beit Knesset, even though we're going to see that has value as well. Amarle, so what did he say to him? He said, you know what? If that's what's keeping you alive, here's my suggestion. Don't go to shul for 3 days and see what happens. She did it, and on day 3 she died. Now again, we're not getting into the details of this story. We're not getting whether that was the right thing to do. Is that the way a rabbi should react to a woman who comes and says, is that how a rabbi should react when a woman comes and says, I have no will to live? We're not going to get into all of that. Okay, exactly. Obviously, he didn't have the modern day sensitivities. Okay, but what we see from this story, and this is the part that's important for us, that some poskim point to, is that apparently there was a mitzvah for her to go to shul. So we see from both of these stories. Now again, these stories are agadita; they're not halachic in nature. They point to a value for a woman to go to shul. So now, what do the modern day poskim say? So again, because of time, we're just going to do. We're not going to see it inside. I brought for you many different sources. There were two different sources two main books that I was using for this. There is one that is more of a Haredi book. This is written by Rabbi Menachem Nissel. It's called Rigshei Lev. It is a book that he wrote. Rabbi Nissel is a well-known lecturer and historian, teaches in many different places, and he wrote a book many years ago. Rigshei Lev is about women in tefillah, and he talked to many different, what we would call modern Haredi poskim, Rav Yashiv, Rav Chaim Pinchas Scheinberg. These are great Gedolei Olim who are no longer alive. And he asked them all these questions about women in tefillah. And one of the things he asked them about was, should women be going to daven with a minyan and not? And I brought for you the different sources. He quotes a few. A lot of it is in the footnotes. Both the sources. One of them points to the fact that there was a famous letter that the Vilna Gaon had written to his children many years ago, where in it he says that women shouldn't go to davening because it leads to bad midot. Now, that was back then.
What are the bad midos?
They're going to start talking about what other women are wearing, lashon hara, this, that. Now, again, what I'm mentioning that because it is an important source. Shh. Remember, we've talked, again, I'm mentioning this now. We've talked about how much of this question is going to be not just halachic, it is going to be cultural and sociological in terms of what's considered accepted in a community. The reasons why some communities say women shouldn't go to minyan or go to shul, one is what the Vilna Gaon said, although it's important to know that was written many years ago, and Rabbi Nissel, I'm bringing it because it's a source that has become an important source in the Haredi world, but both Rav Elyashiv and Rav Scheinberg said it no longer applies nowadays. It no longer applies today that women are going out anyway. Women are very involved, and you can speak lashon hara on the phone. You don't need to go to shul to speak lashon hara. So therefore, they admit that nowadays that doesn't apply. What would be other sensitivities for maybe why women shouldn't go to shul? So what's quoted in the community, what's quoted in, again, the more Haredi sources is issues of tzniut, issues of whether or not the separation and things like that, whether it's appropriate in general for women to be publicly. Again, I'm bringing this because I think it's important for us to understand the different cultural and sociological questions. Because the issue of coming to shul is not simply a halachic question. As we saw, there is no halacha that says women need to go to a minyan. It is a value. And therefore, in certain communities where maybe it's less accepted for women to have certain leadership roles, the nitiyah might be that women will not go to shul. Now, what is the conclusion in the more Haredi circles that I saw? I brought this for you. It seems like they say women are encouraged to go. Even in the Haredi circles nowadays, Rav Elyashiv and Rav Scheinberg both said women should go to, there's a value for women to go with the minyan, both on Shabbos and during the week. But they both added that the minhag seems to be for women to go only on Shabbos and Chol and not necessarily during the week, maybe because they're busy, maybe because of other factors. That is in the more Haredi world. Now, in the world that is what we would call more dati leumi, and again, even with that, there's many different streams and many different value, where women are more active, women are more present, women are more involved in the community. It goes without saying that the issue of tzniut is still in the value that we care about, but it's not necessarily a lack of tzniut for women to come to shul, okay? And therefore, in our communities, the only question becomes, is there a value? And there too, I brought you Rav Melamed and many of the other poskim who say there's 100% a value for women to come to daven with a minyan. If anything, their tefillos are more accepted, their tefillos are more valuable. Rav Melamed does mention the same thing that we noted with the other poskim, which is that for whatever reason, sociologically, women tend to come only on Shabbos and on Chag, and maybe on Yom Noraim, and not necessarily during the week. He doesn't explain why that is. He says it could be because of schedule, it could be, there's many different, but they all agree that if a woman is able to come during the week, and that is something that she feels would enhance her davening, that she is encouraged to, and that her tefillah is considered to be enhanced. The one final thing that I would mention, and with this we'll close, and I'll take questions separately just because I want to give you guys a break, is not to forget what we talked about before, which is that if a woman feels that her tefillah would be more powerful or more meaningful if it's done in private, then that is entirely appropriate. Meaning, this is not a question of I must or I have to. It's a question of, there is no question that tefillos are, that even for women, tefillot are more valuable if they're with a minyan. But if a woman says, my nature and my essence is I want to be more private, I prefer to have that, as we've seen, there's no obligation. And therefore, it is something that every woman should be able to take into account in terms of what she feels is most appropriate. I think in the modern times, most women will say that davening in a shul helps them concentrate more, creates the avirah, and creates all of that. And I think that that's 100% valuable and valid. And then you should encourage yourself as much as you can to go to shul, and even during the week. And even if the men are davening in the women's section, you should kick them out. I know in my shul they have a sign that says, please don't sit here during davening, even during the week, in case a woman wants to come into shul. So that shul should have that. I believe that they should have that for women who decide to want to. But again, I think it is more of a personal decision as opposed to men, where we encourage you should be davening with a minyan. For women, it's more because of the values that we've discussed. It's more of, I think, a question that each woman should really decide for herself. There's no question that there's a certain power to it, but there are what we would call competing values. Okay, I apologize. We went a little over. 2-minute break. Everyone have a great day.